All right, hello, and I'm hoping everybody finds this useful. I am putting in a Wolo Bad Boy Max. It's model number 619. Electric compressor horn into my 2007 Chevy Silverado. This is the crew cab, but it's the classic body style. I wasn't able to find a lot on the internet in reference to the classic body style. There's a lot on the new body style, so I thought I would make this video to help anybody else out there. So what I first had to determine was, do I have one horn or two? That seems to be the question. Many manufacturers like Chevy, Dodge, Ford have all gone through using either a single tone or using the classic two horn setup, which most of people know. And so what I did was, as you can see, I replaced just the driver's side. I removed, the driver's side headlight, and all I did with that is just to gain some more visibility access and to see what I was working with. So I would recommend, if you're going to do this installation on the driver's side, definitely do that. It sheds some light, and again, you're going to have some hand access as far as the electrical. So let me show you real quick. Bear with me. Okay, so we're underneath the driver's side, and as you can see, we've got the main frame rail here. You've got your washer reservoir. Okay, right up in here between these two, 8mm bolt onto the subframe is what holds this horn in on this side. I've already disconnected that, and I don't know if you can see, but I disconnected that bolt. I also disconnected the electrical connection. So I have my horn loose on this side, and it's right up here. Now, getting these out, what I found was the main frame and the subframe actually have a hole in the front. So don't fight, don't bother taking the reservoir out, okay? You don't need to go through all that extra work, because if you just push your horn through towards the front, bring your hand around the main frame, there's your horn, okay? So again, this is the driver's side, a little harder to access. You definitely won't be able to put the Wolo horn in that location because it is just way too tight. There are some pre-drilled holes in the frame here, but they don't necessarily go all the way through. They're random locations. I'm not sure exactly why. So what we're going to do is I'll go over to the passenger side, and I'll show you what that looks like and why I'm going to choose that location. So bear with me. Okay, so we're now on the passenger side, as you can see here. Now, the horn is located in the same location. Okay, you have your frame, and you got your subframe, and here's the horn. Again, it's the same exact thing. It's an 8mm bolt that bolts this to the subframe. But the reason I'm choosing this location to mount the Wolo horn is I already have factory drill holes here. Okay, now Wolo says that there's no drilling required. I don't know exactly how to say this, but the first thing in their instructions is find a location and drill a 5/16 hole. So what we need to do is try to find some existing holes. I'm not a big fan of drilling holes into my vehicle if I don't need to. So over here you can see we've got one hole size, we've got another hole size here, and they go all the way through this subframe. So I have plenty of access in between the edge of my bumper on the inside and this subframe. So what we're going to be doing is removing the passenger side horn, and I think this is an excellent location to be able to work a little more freely. Now, what I did is I did contact Wolo only because, as I said, there is an issue with whether you have one horn or two horns. Now, again, I didn't find a lot of information on the 2007 Chevy Silverado Classic body style. So obviously we can see this has a two horn setup. It's not a one horn setup. I did contact Wolo only because I wasn't sure, and I wanted to be sure if you need to remove both horns or just simply leave these in place if they can be left in place, disconnect the electrical from whatever side you're not using, and then use the electrical on the other side. And that's what they recommended. Now, I would recommend that the one side that you're disconnecting and not using, obviously tape it up real well with electrical tape. You don't want to get any moisture in there, corrode the contacts or anything like that. It does require cutting the connector off, or once I get this connector off here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can put some terminals on the factory connector and then tape it up so that I don't have to cut the connector. I'm not a big fan of cutting factory connectors if you don't have to. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove this only because the bolt holes that I showed you here, the way this new Wolo horn sits, this horn's going to be in the way. So we're going to take this one out. I'm going to put the driver's side one back in. I'm just not going to connect the electrical. And the only reason I'm doing that is just because if the Wolo horn ever were to fail, all I have to do is put this one back in, connect it back up to the electrical, and I'll have both working horns again. Worst case scenario, I'll take the tape off the driver's side and I'll have at least one horn working until I can put this one back in. So I don't foresee a problem. Wolo has a great reputation, but just in case, better safe than sorry. I do have to note that I have a cold air intake system, so that's why you can see the sunlight from above. It does make it easier because I can get my hand down from the top with that air intake system. If you have the factory air intake system, which is the big plastic box, you're going to need to remove that if you want to get to the top, and come down. But as of right now, I don't see any reason why you need to. Pretty much everything can be done from the ground. And again, as of right now, it only looks like 8mm bolt. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We're going to remove the passenger side, and we're going to see what the connector looks like. And we'll come back and see how this thing goes. Now, one thing I do have to mention, I did contact Wolo because their products do come with a relay and a 20 amp recommended fuse that is not included. Now in the instructions, this says if you're basically going to use an auxiliary button, I'm going to wire this into the factory wiring so that I can use my factory horn on the steering wheel. Contacted Wolo's tech department. I asked them if the relay was needed. I have to say I'm a little disappointed. I got an answer of, well, if you hook it up and it doesn't work, you might have to put the relay in. Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's not rocket science. Could have figured that out myself. But they just basically said until you hook it up and test it out, you're not going to know. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and remove the 8mm bolt. All that does is hold this horn in. And again, we have more space here, obviously, as you can see. So we're going to be able to pull this horn straight down and out, not like the driver's side where you push it forward and then grab around the frame and have a hole to pull that out of. You do have that on the passenger side, but again, you've got more clearance on the passenger side here, unlike the driver's side. So this was why we're going to use this location. So hang tight and let's get this out and see what we got with the electrical connections and the new Wolo. Be right back. Okay, so we're back working with the 2007 Chevy Silverado Classic Edition, putting the Wolo Big Bad Max horn in. Just a couple things that I wanted to show you. I'm going to try to splice this video together so that it's all one. If not, there may be two parts to it, so I do apologize. So what you see here is this is the kit. Here's your horn with your compressor, the bolt that comes supplied, and this relay, 30 amp relay for a 12 volt system. Now this is the one I was talking about that they said you may or may not have to use. It is as promised. It is a 1 bolt system, and it is 2 terminal connections, so that's good. Now what I found was in removing my driver's side horn, or correction, my passenger side horn, where we talked about where I'm going to be putting this, as you can see, the horn has a factory connection, and there's 2 locking tabs, one on each side, that simply pop this out. Now this end connects into your factory harness. So again, as I said, I'm not a big fan of cutting into my factory harness if I don't have to. So what I did was I took a flat blade screwdriver and I just pried the locking tabs out. Comes right off, and here's what I found. It's got 2 pinholes for those 2 terminals. So let's work smarter, not harder. I thought, well, I can connect this right back to the factory harness and use these 2 female ends and simply put male ends on existing wiring that I kept. Big fan of keeping extra wiring, screws, nuts, bolts. You never know when you're going to need it. So I brought out those. I also brought out some different other items. These are just some connectors. Here's some splicing connectors where you don't have to cut the factory connection off. If I was unable to use these male end connectors, I was probably just going to go ahead with this because, again, I don't want to cut the connector completely off. Electrical contact grease, can't say enough about it. You definitely want to use this anytime you're using electrical connections. Keeps the moisture out, keeps the corrosion down. And as I said, in keeping extra wiring, I have extra wiring that's already got the ends for the connections to the new Wolo horn. I'll just cut the other ends off and we'll be good. Now, all I had was the blue ones, and if you're going to do anything, I would recommend prior to starting, you're going to need the red ones. They are smaller holes for the factory connector, but what I did, these have a cut in them, and since my truck currently doesn't have any working horns, what I've done is just slightly took a pair of needle nose pliers, bent them in a little bit, and now they're able to fit right into there. So now we have a setup for our connections, and again, we're going to use that to splice onto the wiring and then onto the Wolo horn, and we're going to see how it works. So again, let's get this done, wired up, and then we'll show you how we're going to mount the Wolo horn, and hopefully all goes well and I don't need that stupid relay. Okay, so again, we're back underneath the passenger side of the truck, and as you can see, mounted the Wolo horn here. Okay, you can see just to the left of the screen, that's the factory connector that I pulled off, and chose the larger size bolt just because I was able to pull it closer to the frame. The lower one, I just didn't like the way it sat. So I already put the bolt through. I just snugged the nut up just to hold it tight. And what I did was I put some contact grease. Again, you don't need a lot, but on both terminal ends of the Wolo compressor. So we're going to hook the terminal ends up, and as we discussed, this is what I made. Not hard. It's the factory connector. Like I said, off the original horn, I was able to put the male connectors in. I crimped them down with a pair of needle nose just to make sure they were tight, and then of course tape. As far as I'm concerned, you can never use enough tape to seal it from the elements, but it does have the factory grease in it that's going to keep the moisture and the corrosion out. So these already have the ends on them. So we're going to connect this to the factory harness, and then we're going to connect it to the actual compressor itself and see if we get something working off of the factory horn button. Now, if not, then we're going to go into having to put that relay in, which I'm not really wanting to do. So we're going to hope this works, and let's get this connected up. And like I said, this is going to plug literally right back into the factory connector, so we're not cutting any factory wires. And the other ends are going to connect right to the compressor on the Wolo, and we'll snug that bolt up a little bit to test it out. Okay, so hang tight. Let's get this installed and get right back. Okay, so here we are. This is the Wolo that has been installed. You can see the connections are on, and I've snugged the bolt up. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go test this out and see if we made the right connections. Now, as you can see, it does come marked positive and negative. Of course, coming off of the factory harness, I'm not sure exactly, unless I want to get into peeling this back to find out, you know, the coloring of the wires. So what I'm basically doing is I'm going to rely on, well, you can see a little bit of color there. I'm going to rely on I made the right connections. If not, you just simply swap them over to the opposite sides, and then what's going to happen is you should have contact, and it should work. So that's the next thing to take a look at, and let's get to it, see if the first time did the trick. Alright, so we're back in the truck. I did attempt the horn, and I did have to switch those connections over. All I had was the compressor running. So anyway, it looks like that was an easier way to do it other than cutting wires. So we're going to give this a shot. Alright, so it does work. It's fairly loud. I don't know if it's louder than my stock ones were, but I would say it's fairly loud. And I'm pretty happy with the product. So hope this helps everybody. And you know, if you need any more tips, reach out. If not, good luck, and we'll see you next time.